Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're literally stepping into the shoes of a forensic investigator to examine a completely novel, honestly pretty radical legal theory about our justice system. We're going to unpack a manuscript that approaches capital punishment not as a debate about ethics or morality, but strictly as a matter of product liability and systemic failure. Get ready for a real Sherlock Holmes-style audit of what the source text calls the capital insurance crisis. Let's look at the evidence. Okay, let's dive into this with a paradox that the manuscript uses as its primary hook. Think about this for a second. Why does the state protect a corpse from a vandal, but absolutely block a scientist from that exact same corpse? It's a total sucker punch of a question, isn't it? This is really our first major clue at the crime scene. It sets up the court tension of the author's whole argument, highlighting the state's incredibly contradictory relationship with forensic evidence after a conviction has been handed down. To really grasp this theory, we have to completely reframe how we view the justice system. The source manuscript argues that we need to treat the death penalty as a product being sold to the public as completely error-free. And that brings us to an essential concept here, the Illinois truth. The author uses this term to represent the definitive proof, the judicial notice that capital punishment machinery is systemically fallible and defect-prone. It's like a giant puzzle, but think of the Illinois truth as a massive, glaring corporate recall notice. The system has proven documented defects, which leads directly into this wild concept of capital insurance. The manuscript posits that if a state operates this lethal machinery but literally cannot disprove the error rate in its own jurisdiction, it's essentially running an illegal insurance scheme on human life. The legal pivot here is just fascinating because it entirely bypasses the usual debates we hear all the time. The author is arguing that, if a manufacturer cannot guarantee the safety and accuracy of their product, they are strictly liable for its defects, and the state, selling justice, well, they're no exception to that rule. All right, let's move into Section 1, a defective legal product. So the crucial point is how this argument is structured exactly like a consumer protection lawsuit. It starts with count I, a breach of implied warranty. First, the state implicitly warrants or promises us, the citizens, that its justice machinery is completely fit for its intended purpose, which is accurately identifying the guilty. Second, the Illinois truth acts as that hard empirical proof that this machinery is actually defect-prone. Therefore, the logical conclusion is that maintaining this system without mandatory forensic protocols is knowingly distributing a defective legal product to the public. And that brings us to a very heavy legal concept, bad faith administration. The manuscript emphasizes that continuing to operate this defect-prone machinery post-Illinois precedent actually strips the state of its qualified immunity. That's its typical legal shield against being sued. Why? Well, because the danger of executing an innocent person is no longer just some hypothetical theory. Actually, scratch that. It's more like an empirically documented reality now. Ignoring a known defect in a lethal product absolutely constitutes bad faith administration of the law. Okay, turning the page to Section 2, spoliation and the corpse. Let's map out the step-by-step logic of this specific charge. This is where the manuscript brilliantly attempts to corner the legal system using its very own rules about bodily integrity. Step 1. The state asserts a legal interest in protecting the dead from mutilation or desecration, right? But step 2, according to the text, this establishes a fiduciary duty to the truth of the deceased, which then leads to step 3, the state frequently blocking independent biological or forensic testing post-conviction. And finally, step 4, the manuscript argues that blocking this access actually constitutes spoliation. That's the deliberate destruction or concealment of evidence of the subject. So this logic highlights a pretty glaring contradiction. The manuscript argues the state cannot logically or legally, for that matter, claim a corpse is too sacred to be desecrated by a vandal, while simultaneously arguing it is too insignificant to be forensically audited by a scientist. You can't have it both ways. The author views this second claim not just as some mundane procedural necessity, but literally as an outright confession of concealment. Now we hit the core conflict of the explainer. Section 3, the cloak versus dagger. And this brilliantly illustrates the manuscript's central metaphor for the system's architecture. On one side, we have the cloak. These are your procedural firewalls, strict appellate limits, statutes of limitations, those finality doctrines. The author argues these act as a costume designed to look like law, but they actually function as a veil to hide the truth. On the other side is the dagger. The dagger is the cold, hard, forensic truth itself. The text argues the state is terrified of the dagger because it cuts right through that cloak of immunity, fully exposing the system as an unlicensed, high-risk insurance operation that's just gambling with human life. So what's the proposed solution to this massive architectural flaw? The manuscript outlines a prayer for relief, demanding what it calls a Step 1 audit. This requires a literal, forensic opening of evidence lockers. We're talking about the complete removal of those procedural firewalls we just discussed, dismantling the cloak, essentially. And ultimately, it mandates the post-mortem forensic testing of biological evidence anytime a colorable claim of innocence actually exists. To ground this demand in constitutional law, the author points directly to the 14th Amendment's Liberty Clause. The argument here is super straightforward. Blocking post-mortem forensic testing is not merely bad policy, and it's not just bureaucratic red tape. It is an unconstitutional obstruction of justice. It's a fundamental denial of the right to prove a defect exists within the state's ultimate product. All right, let's bring it all home. Section 4, the final verdict. The manuscript states this so plainly, and I quote, "We are not asking the state to be moral. We are asking the state to be honest." I mean, what a mic drop moment in the text. It's a powerful reminder to all of us that this entire legal theory completely bypasses the traditional, often gridlocked moral debate about the death penalty. Instead, it relies entirely on the cold, objective, and frankly inescapable framework of strict product liability. Which brings us to a deeply provocative question I want to leave you with today. If the product being sold by the state is justice, and a recall notice, the Illinois Truth, has officially been served, is ignoring the defect still law, or is it just fraud? The manuscript leaves us wrestling with the true nature of the legal machinery we all live under. It really challenges us to demand that the systems governing life and death meet the exact same liability standards as the consumer products we buy every single day. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the machinery.